Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with Ellie, and I'm here with Gina and Letitia. Do you two want to go ahead and introduce yourselves before we start things off? Gina, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Gina Young. I'm an LICSW in Minnesota and a director for Ellie Mental Health.
And I'm Letitia Harris, and I'm a mental health practitioner for Ellie Mental Health in Minnesota.
We are coming at you with a brand new therapy book club episode. That's what I've decided to call these because Letitia, Gina, and I have already done several of these, and they're so fun. It's fun to be able to talk about different books that we have on our to-read list and just to kind of talk about how helpful it's been in our own practice and whether or not we recommend them. So today we are talking about Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller. So let's start things off by talking about, is this a helpful book for therapists and why?
I made Miranda read this book 2 years ago when she was in my small group consult, because I think incorporating different ways of learning, not just always consulting about cases, but also like reading what's popular and what's available and out there is so helpful too. And someone else presented this book as an option. It wasn't on my list. And so we read it as a small group consult and slowly made our way through it. It's a really great starter primer book for those who are interested in like getting their feet wet and understanding attachment in their relationships in their lives. So I found it was a great book. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Gina. It definitely is a book that just opens your eyes to what attachment styles are, what attachment styles you may have, what relationship issues or concerns you might address or might need to address. I think it addresses all of those things and how to better manage those things, as well as not just in romantic relationships, but also in friendships, in other personal relationships that you might have, in parent-child relationships, just connecting to what attachment styles you might have and how to manage them and what is probably a proper attachment style.
Yeah, and I'm glad you say that, Letitia, too, because I think that one of the questions I have for you too, as we're like jumping into this book is, so this book talks about kind of the main attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, but it doesn't talk about disorganized attachment. And so I think that that's one thing that I was a little bit confused about. Do you have any idea why it doesn't really talk about that? Is it not an attachment style in the attached world?
What I first learned about attachments was that there were 4 styles, right? And it's missing the disorganized. I think it comes across in different names with other people, but disorganized is how I learned it to be. And I think there's less research in that area, and I bet it doesn't lend well to how this book wanted to present itself, because disorganized often comes when you've been in complex traumatic situations for a long period of time, right? And I bet those people are not having as successful relationships as the people they wanted to demonstrate or talk about in this book. So to me, that's so funny that you bring that up, because I wrote the 3 down because I wanted to remember them, and I was like, they're missing the other one. That we as clinical therapists, right, have also always learned about too. It's the smallest percentage, right, of people that have disorganized, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be talked about. So I do think that this book is really missing that, Miranda.
I wonder if they just kind of loop it into avoidant attachment.
Maybe.
Like, I think that in some ways disorganized could look like avoidant, or maybe I guess it's kind of a blend between
It's the
avoidant
blend.
and anxious. And so it's almost like if you find yourself with disorganized attachment, then maybe it's actually that you can find yourself kind of in both camps. But
And also maybe those people with disorganized attachment, they couldn't find them for the research either. I mean, there's also such a small percentage, right? Like, I just wonder if those people are like, I'm not going in to do any kind of research for this. Like, I bet that probably played a part. It's a small group.
Interesting. Yeah.
And having a clear understanding, I think, of it too. And maybe there's just not that clear of an understanding for it. Or like Miranda was saying, it could be molded into 2 different categories. And so they just didn't feel it necessary to give it its own space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so now that we've kind of been like, okay, disclaimer, it only goes through the 3.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that I had an issue with slash like am trying to reconcile as I read this book is that it really paints secure attachment style as like the best. Everybody wants a secure attachment style. And I think that it also makes it feel very black and white because I mean, you've got, it kind of paints this picture of like, if you are anxious, go find a secure attached person. And I don't know, like I think that a lot of people who read this book and I can kind of speak from experience myself, but then also when I've read this with clients where they have read this and been like, well, what if I am not completely securely attached? Or what if I have some anxious attachment style like traits? Or like is there a way that I can become securely attached? Or like how do I find a partner that's securely attached? I think it really kind of like paints it as like here's the gold standard and good luck if you don't if you don't reach that. And so I was curious what you all thought about that slash like what were some points that you liked or didn't like about this book?
Letitia, you want to go?
Yeah. When I think about that, I think none of us are like completely 100% secure in anything, right? And so the ideology that we have to find a secure person or a secure relationship or a secure attachment minimizes your ability to just be content in relationship that you're in, right? And I think awareness is most important. So I'm aware that I have an avoidant attachment, right? I can work on that to increase and or decrease that avoidance. It doesn't mean that I necessarily will be 100% secure in my attachment to another person, but it does mean that I am aware of that and I can work on that and I can take steps and actions that will actually incite me to be able to have that secure attachment. So in that aspect, I think that is probably what's not reading in the book, like that if you have these certain attachment styles, then you are going to have failed relationships, which is not true because we have all been living in relationship, whatever kind of relationship attachment style you have. You've been living in that for however long and, until you came across this book or until you came across relationships that, open that door for you. So I think just learning how to manage relationships, I think is where they're trying to go with that. But I think it did lend for not allowing that to be, the old age, you have to be perfect mentality, I think reads a little bit more in that secure attachment. Because I know some people who have secure attachments and still have poor communication skills, right? And so their relationships are still not at a point where they are 100% successful. And so it doesn't lend for success, but I think it does lend for the book's purpose to kind of make a definite distinction between the three.
That is such a good point. No, I think that you made a lot of really good points there. I think that like chapter 6 literally says if you want to have a secure, functioning relationship, the best strategy is to choose a partner who is capable of security and commitment. End quote. And I think that goes to what you're saying, where it's like it's not necessarily that like the best strategy is to find a secure partner. The best strategy is to find a partner who is capable of security and commitment. And I think that like the question that I would have is, are people who have avoidant attachment styles capable of security and commitment?
Yep.
Yes, they are, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's true, Miranda. When we talked about this book as a group too, it was like if you didn't have a secure attachment, you were screwed. I mean, that's the message in the book is like, hope you find someone secure because otherwise it's going to be really hard for you to function. I am definitely summarizing that, but that's what I felt like, that they kind of put it up on a pedestal and it was like, get out there, try to find a secure person, because that was going to be the only thing that could sort of counteract the anxious and the avoidant attachment part of it. I think, and we talked a lot about that. I think it made some of the members of the group when we were reading this feel anxious about having an anxious attachment of like, what does that mean for me? I wish it was more instructional and more of in an objective way versus this is how we see you having a good relationship later in life. And that's only if you can find a secure person. Right. And we even talked to Miranda when we got into talking about avoidant attachment style, where it was like, these are the people who are less likely to be getting help too, right? Like we talked about as a group how often we see anxious people that identify with anxious attachment because they go to therapy. You know what I mean? Like they're swimming in this sea and they're like, why isn't it working? And it makes them anxious, right? And so they're seeking out more support and more help. And how often I'm sure there are people out there with avoidant attachment who get therapy. I haven't seen a lot of them. And they haven't come across I just haven't met them yet. And so it's also, it made it really seem like anxious people, anxiously attached people, and avoidantly attached people could never find success together. Right? Like they made it just, those two are opposing factors and shouldn't be together. So I think there were just some like broad sweeping statements in there that I didn't always agree with. And one thing that you didn't really like is they didn't talk about like, well, how do you work yourself into a secure attachment, right?
Right.
You're going to be this way forever and ever, you know,
Right.
and will work towards becoming securely attached. You had a lot of critiques about that, and I think that's super fair. So,
Well, I will say too, like one thing that I appreciated about this book at the like right out of the gate is how it talks about how attachment styles in your romantic relationships as an adult are based on your early experiences and how like I think it's chapter 1 just kind of really walks through how there is a straight line from your early experiences to your, experiences as an adult. And so I think that that's something that a lot of people don't think about. That's something that you can usually say, well, I'm anxiously attached because of X, Y, and Z. Or I can see how these, you know, relationship patterns then play out as an adult. But I do think that I'm someone who believes very strongly, going back to the point that you were just making, where you can change your attachment style. I'm someone who believes that, like, if you are anxiously attached as a child or avoidant, if you are in a partnership later, or even like friendships later with people who are secure and committed and like showing up time and time again, the serve and return, then I do believe that that's something that you can grow and change your attachment style. And so I think that that's something that they kind of allude to in this book a little bit, but not, that was something that I felt like it fell short a little bit, where it's like, I see so many people in therapy who are anxiously attached. And so I want them to read this book and have real tools for their relationships, but also I want them to feel hope for, like, even if I don't find myself in a relationship with someone who's securely attached, I believe that my relationships in the future can be successful.
yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Yeah, I want people to have hope for their future, right? And yet their attachment style isn't like a stamp of you're not going to be able to make it. Rather it's something that you can learn and grow with. And I think your point to, I have found so much growth in my own friendships with close friends, right? And setting your own boundaries with them and learning from that is huge. And it will definitely impact, my future like romantic relationships too, because I've gotten to practice with my friends, and
Oh,
we
yeah.
do some of that boundary setting with our clients too, right?
Yep.
Like it's a great, these are great. There are other avenues that we grow these skills rather than just romantic relationships. And this book really misses that. It just focuses on romantic relationships.
Yeah.
Which also, if that's something you struggle with, it doesn't give you a very good hope for the future, right? If you're only like, if you're in relationship with this person, then you can work on these things. But if not, that's just not true. Like Letitia said in the beginning, like we have relationships in all areas of our life, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Some Q&As. I have some listener questions about this book. So, right out of the gate, I am dating someone who says they're secure, but they don't meet my emotional needs. Does that mean I'm anxious, or are they just not a good partner?
Well,
Well, there's a quiz in this book that they should take. I think that would be helpful to give you
yes.
an idea of that. I think that can also just be just a mismatch of personalities and needs,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Not
Mhm.
necessarily not necessarily non-matching attachment styles.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
When
Yeah.
I first read that question, I actually thought to myself, like, again, people are not black and white. Like, it is not like I am 100% secure and my partner is 100% anxious. We are
yeah,
going to have different parts of relationships and commitment, and just we are going to have different parts of us that might skew anxious or skew avoidant, and so I think that sometimes when we put these labels on ourselves, we
Mhm.
just think that, like, oh, I'm secure, my partner's secure, we should have a fantastic relationship. But there's always going to be, like, we're not black and white people. There's a lot
Yeah.
of gray involved.
I think it
when I
also, oh, go ahead, Jean.
go ahead, Letitia.
Oh, I think it's also important to determine what security means to that person. So that person saying I'm secure, they may be secure in certain things, but they may not be emotionally secure or may not feel like they can be emotionally vulnerable. If that's a feeling, then that may cause them to being distant in their emotions or distant in being able to express or even understand. And emotions are very complex, even though they sound simple and, happy, sad, mad, you know, they sound simple as emotions. What do you do when you're frustrated and it shows up as sad? What do you do when you're
Mhm.
frustrated and it shows up as angry? Like your emotions are very complex. And so if a person is emotional or not emotional, it may be because they're one, not understanding it, or they may be avoiding it. So they may be secure in other areas, but may be avoiding being able to connect to their emotions.
I I also think you can be securely attached and have unknown triggers,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like conscious triggers from past stuff where like, oh, somebody steps on something or says something that steps on a trigger for you and you're not even aware of it. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden you become really anxious or you shut down, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
we're always learning about ourselves, right? That doesn't ever stop. And so in a relationship, I bet you could have two secure people and each can step on one another's triggers without realizing it or knowing it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. All
Yep.
right, next question. I know I'm anxious. I'm not sure what my spouse's attachment style is. What's the best way to communicate my needs without pushing them away?
I think the book does talk about this. It definitely mentions, and I think I've learned just through providing therapy services, being really clear and consistent about what you need and why you need it. I think that is the biggest thing. And I work with some clients who are anxiously attached, and we're really working on how do we move into the dating world and still have clear boundaries about what we need and what we're looking for from relationships. And so without feeling like you're running the other person over or feeling like you're too needy. I always hear that one, like needy and clingy. And I'm like, nope, that's not how we're talking about it anymore. You're just letting people know how you want to be treated when you're stating your boundaries. So I do think it requires some reframing around that too. And for my client, it's looking like, okay, well, when we're texting, like I need regular responses, right? Like, I'd like to hear from you within 24 to 36 hours or
Mhm.
whatever that looks like for you. I'd like to hear from you within 12 hours, whatever that looks like, right? And if we're making arrangements to go out, like I need three choices and three choices of places and I'll pick one of them or like whatever that looks like, you get to decide. And then that other person will give you feedback. Like I'm not able to do that, or here's what I could do instead. So I think some people are really scared of being like, this is how I'm looking to be treated in relationships because they're so fearful of being shut down.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think it's important to remember to be, like Gina was saying, clear, concise.
Yeah.
And I,
Yep.
I I know for me, I'm a very detailed person. So I like to be, my husband is not. So we like, I have to be a little more brief when I'm describing something because I will write a 2-page paper and he will write like a couple of paragraphs and be like, didn't you get what I was saying? And for me, I have to really pull back and say, that's how he communicates. This is how I communicate. Let me find a clearer, more concise, and even condensed way to say what I'm trying to say so that he doesn't get lost in all of the emotional stuff that I'm expressing or all of the thoughts or all of the repeated sentences that I'm displaying, right? So being clear, concise, but also being brief. Sometimes you do need to be shorter in how you're describing something, or shorter in how you're needing to say something or wanting to say something, so that person doesn't get lost in whatever you're trying to deliver. You can sometimes, you and that other person can both be lost in it, and then everybody's in a whirlwind trying to figure out what is actually being talked about. So sometimes being clear, concise, being specific, right? Being specific, like Gina was saying, your needs, specifically displaying your needs and explaining your needs, but being clear and concise and sometimes condensed, you know.
I know I'm like 20 years too late to this, but I have been enjoying DBT so much recently. Just realizing so many of my clients struggle with either borderline or attachment trauma, and how helpful DBT is for this, because there is a whole section of DBT about interpersonal effectiveness and being able to communicate your needs to people. And holy moly, this book should probably just have a DBT chapter in there.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say about
Fiction.
that. Yeah. All right. Last Spitfire question. Can two avoidants have a successful relationship, or is it doomed?
What do you think, Letitia?
I mean, I think that they can, but I think it does take one or two of them, one or both of them, I should say, being able to communicate, right? Because when you're avoiding something, you're stepping away from it. You're deciding that you would rather not address it and hope that it goes away, right? Like if I don't say this is the problem, it will eventually go away, right? But it doesn't do that anything but make that space bigger. It doesn't do anything but make the assumptions louder and clearer, right? And so if you're an avoidant, being able to communicate however you communicate best, right? I know that sometimes sending a letter is better, right? Like sometimes I've had to write a letter to my husband as opposed to say something to him out loud, right? Because the emotions that would be attached to it wouldn't allow for us to complete the conversation, right? So sometimes I had to step back and say, what is the best way for me so that that person can receive every emotion that I'm trying to express, or everything that I'm trying to say, I can get it all out without them feeling like they want to run away from it, or feeling like they're too anxious to have that conversation or too emotional to be in it. And even though you're avoidant, you still have emotions, and they still rise up in you, right? You just avoid talking about them, or avoid addressing them, or avoid dealing with them, right? But they still exist. And so being able to recognize that this may be an more emotional thing for me or for my spouse or for my significant other or partner, right? And I may need to find another alternative for the communication of it. But communication, I think, is very important. And in every aspect of relationship or friendship or partnership, whatever it looks like, having communication and being able to communicate. At the end of the day, you just got to communicate however you communicate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there are lots and lots of people who are avoidant who are probably married right now. It also just depends, like, how do you define happiness and success in a relationship? I think that looks different for everybody. And I think, there are also those relationships where you're together for 30 years and then you divorce because turns out you weren't happy and you were just avoiding everything. You know what I mean? So yes, they can be together, but how do you define what a successful relationship looks like is decided by the two people in it.
So, and on that note too, I think that some people who are an avoidant, and if they're married to an avoidant, like that could, maybe they just they value independence and they value personal space and it works for their partnership. And so it certainly could work for them. I think that, I don't think that you're doomed if you're an avoidant. I think that you just need to recognize what your needs are in a relationship. And I think this is maybe the bottom line thesis statement for this entire book, where it's like, don't let your attachment style define you, but let it inform how you are communicating with your partner. Let it
Mm-hmm.
inform what you need in a relationship, because you are not too needy. Your needs are not too big. I think that allow yourself to recognize what you need, and then say to yourself, how much do I need this? Like, is this an unmet need in my relationship? Is this something that's like a really, really big thing that I'm like, oh, I need to communicate this with my partner? Just let it inform how you navigate your relationship.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I think of an attachment style as like a roadmap, right? Like
Mhm.
it's there to help you learn where you're going, but you ultimately get to decide, So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other last thoughts about this book?
no, but I love the Q&A questions, and we should definitely do more of those.
I do
Yes.
too.
Like, if we
Yeah.
do a book club, I'd love to have like people who've read it, their questions, because we get to hear about like what we think about it, but I love hearing the questions that people have that come up when they read it.
I do
Yeah.
too. Yeah. So
Super.
maybe on that note, if you have any questions about attachment style, or just questions in general for a therapist, email me, creative@elliementalhealth.com, and we'll do another Q&A sort of
Yeah.
fun episode like this. I love it.
I loved it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.